Right, so what you're going to need for making these tags, you're going to need different colours of paper. So in this example, I have red, white and craft. I'm sticking with this kind of theme this year, but you can go crazy. You can use whatever it is that you'd like to use. You can use green, you can use silver, whatever paper you have on hand. You're also going to need scissors, craft knife or scalpel. This is some cheap one that I found in probably In Excess. These little stampers. Now if you don't have these, it's not the end of the world. I'm just using them as extra little details, like you can see on here. You're also going to need a Pritt stick. This is about as basic as it gets. This is from a garden centre actually. You're going to need a pencil, whatever you have. A hole punch. Now if you don't have one of these, that's not the end of the world. I will get to that point later. You're going to need a ruler. Now if you're using a craft knife, I would recommend a metal ruler because you're not going to scuff the sides and you're not going to dig into the plastic. But if you don't have one, again, not the end of the world. You can use a plastic, you just got to be a bit more careful. Craft board. Always use your craft board as well. These will protect your table and surfaces. Don't want to get that sort of ruined. For any circular letters, if you're needing them, something you can draw around. Tape or potentially a pot lid, whatever that might be. You can just draw around those circles. And lastly, garden twine. And this will be for creating the little hooks to tie them onto your presents. Right, we are going to work on a letter B. Going to be a serif letter. And we're going to go for, I think, a red background. And we may put the B in the craft colour. Might do some details in the white. So I want to make sure it's roughly the same size as these. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, just something similar. Now, I've drawn letters many a time before, so I don't need to measure it out quite so much. It's useful to have the cutting board behind you so you've got all of the lines, just so you know you can keep it all straight. But again, you know, it's not really the end of the world at this point. Right, what sort of size do we want? Maybe sort of 70 mil. Keep it at that. So line it all up. See, these lines are useful because you can see top and bottom. Out of the way. And then we want 70 up as well. Again, make sure it's all lined up so you know you're drawing a straight line. Cutting boards are the easiest way to keep things straight. Right. Now we can cut this one out. And you can use scissors for this, doesn't really matter. You can use fancy scissors, sort of like a scallop edge or something like that. Personally, I find it just easier to use than the craft knife. I get a bit more control, it's a bit tidier. If you don't have any, scalpel, craft knife, whatever, you can just use whatever you've got. Scissors work just as well. Right, this is our main background, so it's about the same size as this one. A little bit smaller, that's perfect, that's not a problem. Right, now onto the B. Okay, so now the B has got to fit into this section, right? So we don't want it any bigger than 70 mil, unless we do something with this kind of style, where we've sort of gone over, you can see over the edges. So generally the best bet is to draw out your letter first before we cut anything. So if we just measure, say, I think I'm going to go for 55 high. Yeah, I think that's about right. A nice straight line going. Now, with these reference sheets, what you can see. So this one's 20mm tall, but interestingly, it is 21mm wide. So it's actually wider than it is tall. So I'm just gonna, I am improvising a little bit. I'm just gonna make it 60mm wide. Right, so I've kind of got my outline shape here, or outline space rather. Now if we refer back to this, what you can do, and what I teach in my workshops, is for every measurement, so for example from here all the way over to here, so in this case 21, what you'd do is you'd pick a multiplication, so say for example times 2, and in this case that would be 42mm wide. So to make your letter bigger, you pick a multiplication, always stick with that. You measure from one point to the end, 21, in this case 42, so then you'd mark out 42. Now in my case I'm going slightly bigger, so I'm actually just going to copy it by eye, which you can also do. You can mark off a couple of little points if you wanted to do like the center point, for example. I'm actually just going to do it by eye because I don't want this to be too faffy, I guess. So a B is not the simplest of letters, but as long as you get the basics right, so for example the bottom bowl of the B is actually slightly bigger, and it does also stick out further, so you can see here as well. This bit here is touching the edge, but here you've got a bit of a gap. So it's useful to know those kind of rules of letters. It will help your letters look a lot more balanced. Always keep your pencil light for this kind of thing as well, because what we're going to do afterwards, we're going to rub it out. And you don't want stacks of pencil lines, because nobody wants that. When you're creating your thick part, so you've got your thick section here, and you've got a thin section here. The thin sections will always be the same, so from your serif through to the centre here, this bit and this bit, whereas the thick bits, this one is the same. The curved sections are slightly wider, and it's to do with an optical, it's kind of like an optical illusion for our eyes. If it was exactly the same size, it would look too thin. It's the same for any curved letters. If you can see here on the C, the curve actually pops slightly above and below the line. If you can see very, very slightly. Again, it's to do with that optical illusion. So what you can do, just to make sure that you're getting it right, like I said, I am sort of improvising a little bit. Let's make that a bit wider. Let's make an even 15. You can make sure that these are the same as well. So okay, at the moment it's a bit tight. Make that a bit bigger. 15, say 16, make that a bit bigger as well. So the more you can make sure that your letters are balanced, the better they'll look at the end. What you can do with some serifs is you can curve off these corners here, so these internal corners. It's quite a common thing to do. If you leave them square, it's called a slab serif. And that's just a slightly different style, basically. It's whatever you really want it to look like. To be perfectly honest, cutting with a craft knife, you might be, or even scissors, you might be better off leaving it as a square, because it's easier to get into those corners into a point rather than having to do a curve. But it's entirely up to you. Right, what do we think? That's not too bad. Now with the letter B, and obviously some of the other letters, we've got a lot of internal space to cut out. If you're uncomfortable with scissors, or you don't have a craft knife, or you're just not sure you're going to be able to get that, what I would recommend is actually you cut out the main shape, and you can either colour in the centre, or you can just give it like an outline and leave the centre white, or whatever your top colour is. It really doesn't matter, so long as you've got this outline. If you can't cut it out, it's not the end of the world. You could even fill the space with little stars, perhaps, sort of representing the gap, and that could be quite a nice little feature. Sort of rather than cutting out the space. So there's lots of things you could do if you're not entirely confident. Right, what I am going to do, and so I don't have the entire rest of this paper, just going to cut myself a little bit out so that it's not in my way. I think because of this curve, sometimes it's easier to use scissors. So that's actually what I'm going to do this time. Scissors can be a little less accurate, but it really depends on your, how patient you're willing to be. Don't go and rush something if you think you're going to mess it up. Now obviously, coming into this corner, that's a little bit difficult. So what you can do is you can cut off your top corners. Cut that off really smoothly. And then you can come in with a craft knife and you can cut this a little bit off just so it's out of the way. And then you can come back in and trim off the rest. Okay, that's looking fairly tidy. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I am actually going to keep it a slab serif, so I'm not going to round these corners off. I'm going to keep them straight. For me, I just think that's easier. I think it will look a little bit nicer. Cut into a little bit there, cut into a little bit here. Now, I've said this a few times now, but this is quite rough as far as perfecting the letter goes. So I'm just going to line up on this edge here, just so that I know. Now, my little gap here is 1.5 of these squares, which, if I'm honest, makes life a little bit difficult. But you just want to make sure that you're getting a really nice straight line. I'm going to cut down in here. Now don't worry too much if you go over the edges. It's really not the end of the world. I'm going to trim off these little extra bits. There we go, there's one. Oh, not quite caught it yet. There we go. It does take some practice to get into these corners properly. You can probably see here, I've got a little bit of a scuff, that's fine. Just trim it back. Next, we're going to have a go at cutting out the centre. Now, this one I will be a little bit more accurate on because I want to make it look pretty. I don't want it to be completely rough. So what I am going to do, just make sure that those two match up. And I'm also going to make sure that these edges match up as well. Because obviously your serif and the bottom of your, so this section here and this section here, they should be the same. And this width here should also be the same as the bit in the centre. So these ones should all measure the same. I think my centre's slightly wider. But again, this is not the end of the world. Also, worth bearing in mind, things like letters like an O, where it's the same shape, what's essentially backwards and forwards. You can draw on the back, so you don't have to worry about all your pencil marks, because I'm going to have to rub all of these out in a bit. And sometimes if maybe you've pressed too hard, it gets a little bit difficult, gets a little bit rough. So where you can, I'd recommend drawing on the back. It's not the end of the world. You can do whatever it is that you fancy. Again, you want to be really careful up to these edges here. Don't really want to go over. Don't worry straight off the bat if you're not hugely accurate with your curve. But whatever you do, try and make it rough on the inside, so on this bit, because this bit we're throwing away, aren't we? We don't need this bit anymore. So if you make any mistakes, if it's going into that section, it's fine. It's not going to mess up your letter. Oh, not quite cut. Try not to pull these either. So if you pull it, you'll leave like a rough patch. Try and really get to that edge. So it's a really nice, like, clean curve, a clean cut rather. There we go. So that's come out really nicely. Just going to cut down the sides here. Again, making sure this is lined up at the bottom. And don't cut too far into your curve, because it's not a straight line and then a curve. It's sort of a smooth shape. So this one might have gone a little bit far, but that's not the end of the world. Right, now I think that's a little bit plain, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some 3D effect to it, kind of like what I've done on here and here. And again, this is going to help potentially cover up some little fussy areas if I don't like them. Start down here. So what I'm going to do, I want my 3D section to come down this way. So if you think the light's coming from up here, the shadow with 3D is going to fall to the bottom left. So we've got it down here. So this is where your direction is coming from. Best make sure that this is all nicely aligned. It doesn't actually matter too much at this point because you're going to cut it out anyway. Now I'm going to draw around your shape. What you could do at this point is give yourself like a border. So you could cut out a little bit further round. And in fact, we could do that. That might look quite nice. Rather than giving it 3D, we could give it a border. Make sure you keep your top shape nice and still, otherwise you're going to have some weird lines going on. Remember to keep your pencil lines pretty light, otherwise it's going to be a bit difficult to see. So on some things it's a little bit difficult to see. You can just about see that the pencil marks there. So what I was saying is if you want your 3D to come from this direction, so we want it to come down here. Now the easiest way is actually just to shuffle your template down a little bit. What I'm going to do here is actually make it touch the bottom. It's just a little bit easier, means I don't have to worry about cutting it. Then you draw around your template again. So again, hopefully you can see that we've got what's basically two letters now. We've got your front one and your back one. Now this bit can get a little bit confusing, so what I'm going to do is just sort of really gently shade in all of the areas that are going to be hidden. Now if you get stuck with the inside bits, if you look here, so this bit here is definitely covered. Great, so we can cover that bit up. Perfect. Now when you shuffled it down, oh, okay, so this bit was covered, so I can cover that bit up. So sometimes you just need to just go back and double check. So this bit here, you see this section? This is always uncovered. So this is going to be a hole, basically, is what I'm getting at. But it's always worth double checking just to make sure that you're in the right place. So, okay, so this bit needs to be covered. This bit all down here. Now when it comes to your edge here, you can see I've actually got like a big square gap. What you want to do, just join those two corners up. And that will give it like this sort of 3D effect here. If you didn't join them up, you'd basically just have yourself a shadow. You're just creating the second shape below it. So it's exactly a replica, it's not 3D at all. Gonna fill that in. Now I know that that's my gap in here. Just gonna outline that a bit better. Perfect, right. I'm actually going to cut this out with scissors, and I might leave those centre bits, I'm unsure yet. We'll come back to that. And cut it out really roughly to start with. Don't want to waste too much paper, so it's always useful to keep what you can quite close. Join that bit up. Now, just going to cut this out. Now don't worry too much if you actually go inside your lines here, because if you remember, this shape is going to go on the top. So if you go inside your lines, it's actually not the end of the world because you're going to cover it up anyway. Also, if this one's a little bit rougher, again, it doesn't really matter so much because you're covering up. Pro tip here, when you're coming into a point, use the very end of your scissors, because if you go like this, you're more likely to cut into it and you're going to go over, so you have less control. So again, this is why it's actually quite more useful to have smaller scissors. Like I said, these ones are a little bit big for this purpose, but they're a good pair of scissors, so I don't mind using them. Right, nice little straight line down there, straight line down there, all the way down. Now again, so this is why it's useful that I used a slab serif, not a standard curved internal corner here, because it just makes my life slightly easier when cutting out. Right, here we go. So now what I've got, here we go. So what you essentially have is your 3D shape. Now what I am going to do, I am going to cut out these centre parts so that it looks a little bit more like these ones. But again, we're looking at quite a small shape here, so it can get a bit fiddly. So right, now what you can see, if we line up the B properly, what we have is a 3D letter. So now we have our background. So you can keep this really simple, and you can just place it in the center. Now obviously where we put the 3D on, it's taken up quite a lot of space, so it's actually very close to the edge. What I'm going to do is just center it as best I can. Now if you need to cut a new background, that's absolutely fine. It really doesn't matter at this point. So if you're happy with that, we can stick that down. You could move it around, you could have it hanging off the bottom. In fact, that looks kind of cool. Maybe I could do that, a little bit different. What I also have is these little stamps. So I've had these for years and years. Basically, you can cut out your own little shapes with them. Now again, thinner card does actually work better in these cases. But what we've got here is a nice perfectly formed little star. So again, if you've got little rough patches you want to cover up, just put a bit of decoration on them. Absolutely not a problem. Let's get gluing. Okay. Now, always glue onto the back of the piece that you're doing, on the piece that you're using. You can kind of see that my glue stick is a bit funny shaped, so that's because I don't do it this way, because then I don't have control over where the glue is landing. Whereas doing it this way, I can use the edge of my glue stick and get into the slightly smaller corners. Also, if you're a bit worried about your use of a glue stick, if you feel like you always get glue everywhere, that's not a problem. Just use a spare piece of paper. You just have a spare piece of paper you can glue on here, and then it won't matter because you won't get anything on your board or anything. It's the worst when you get something on the board and it ends up sticking to everything and it goes grey and messy and gross, and nobody likes that. Right, make sure this is aligned nicely. Good thing about Pritt Stick as well is that you can move it around a little bit just before it sets, so that's good. Yep, happy with that. What I am going to do actually is offset it slightly, because I think that's going to look quite cool. A little bit alternative. So if you do have it hanging off the edge, so if we're going to put it here, you can just mark on the back of your letter where you don't need the glue. So I know it's a bit difficult to see, but I've got two lines here. So you can then fill in all the gaps that you need to fill in, and then you won't have any excess glue on the back that's going to get sticky elsewhere, because nobody wants that. Stick it down, line up those little marks on the back that I made. There go. Stick that down nicely. Now, I've still got a couple of these little rough patches. What I'm actually going to do is cover them up, and I'm hoping that this is going to work. So this red card is actually a lot thicker. Cute little red star. Going to cover up some of these little rough patches that I've got. Because to be perfectly honest, I don't really like them that much. I'm not entirely happy with them. So here you go, you can see that it's just cutting out nice little stars. They're quite cute. I might do a few extras on here just to make it look a bit more balanced. And you can double them up as well. If you want to go fancy, why not? Let's double some up. Stick some of these down. Be a bit more gentle with the glue on this one because you don't want it to overlap and get stuck everywhere else around the front. Here we go, stick it down, cover up a rough patch. I'm just going to push that in. I don't really want another star, I don't think. Now you just need your basic kind of hole punch. If you don't have one of these, it's not the end of the world. You can use a blunt pencil. Be really, really careful. You can poke it into the carpet. So put your piece of paper on a carpet, pick the middle of your hole and push it really gently through. It's a bit messier, but it's not the end of the world. So what we want to do, just going to line up where you want the hole. It's really difficult to see unless you've got one of these more specific hole punches. Punch a little hole. Perfect. Now we've just got some standard garden twine. Really doesn't cost very much, and you can literally get it from, you know, garden shops or craft places. You can get crafts, it's the same stuff. Tie it through the hole. Tie it up. And there we go. Cute little tag, really simple to make, as easy as pie. You've got basically with stuff that you can find around the house. Let me know what you think.